The sound of the war was a drone. It wasn't the scream of a bomb or the crack of a rifle. Not yet. For 6 hours, it was a steady, rhythmic thrum that vibrated in the marrow of your shin bones. It was the roar of 4 Rolls-Royce Merlin engines, chewing through the thin air at 19,000 feet, dragging 30 tons of aluminum and men back from Berlin. Sergeant Nicholas Alkemade shifted his weight, but there was nowhere to go. The rear turret of the Avro Lancaster, call sign S for sugar, was a bubble of perspex and steel no wider than a bathtub. It was the loneliest place in the sky. He flexed his fingers inside his silk liners, then the wool mittens, then the heavy leather gauntlets. He couldn't feel them. The air temperature outside was 40 degrees below zero. Inside the turret, it wasn't much better. A layer of frost had colonized the interior of the glass, a white lace that he had to constantly scrape away with a plastic scraper to see the dark void behind them. Scrape, scan, scrape, scan. His breath bloomed in short white clouds that instantly froze on his oxygen mask. The rubber smelled of stale talcum powder and his own recycled fear. "Tail to skipper, all clear 6 o'clock, Alkemade said. His voice sounded tinny, alien in his own ears, filtered through the throat microphone. "Copy that, Nick. Keep your eyes peeled. We aren't out of the woods yet," the pilot's voice crackled back, distorted by the static of the intercom system. It sounded calm, too calm. The kind of calm that comes after dropping 4,000 pounds of high explosives on a city center. Alkemade leaned back against the armor plate. The vibration of the airframe was a constant massage that made his teeth ache. Beneath him, the floor was a mess of spent brass casings from a test burst he'd fired over the channel. They rolled back and forth with the sway of the bomber, a metallic clink, clink, clink that sounded like coins dropping into a collection plate. He looked out into the black. The Ruhr Valley was below them somewhere, an abyss of darkness hidden under a blanket of clouds. But up here, the moon was a searchlight. It washed the wings of the Lancaster in a ghostly silver. It made them a target. "Don't think about the fighter," he told himself. "Think about the pint, the warm, flat beer at the pub in Lincolnshire. Think about the girls." But the thought wouldn't hold. His mind drifted back to the turret. They called it the glass coffin for a reason. If the plane went down, the centrifugal force would pin him to the walls. If the hydraulics failed, the doors wouldn't open. He was a barnacle on the hull of a whale, exposed to everything. A sudden jolt. The plane dropped 50 feet in a vacuum pocket, then slammed into denser air. Alkemade's stomach hit his throat. "Flak!" the mid-upper gunner shouted. Alkemade saw it then. Black puffs of smoke materializing in the silver moonlight, silent and deadly. Then came the sound, not a bang, but a dull whump, like someone beating a carpet in the room next door. Whump. Whump. Shrapnel rattled against the fuselage. It sounded like a handful of gravel thrown against a tin shed. "Skipper, corkscrew starboard, go!" The world tilted. The Lancaster, a lumbering beast, groaned as the pilot threw it into a violent banking dive. Alkemade was slammed against the side of the turret. The gravity pulled at his cheeks, dragging his eyelids down. The hydraulic motors of his turret whined in protest as he fought to keep the 4 Browning .303 machine guns level with the horizon. He scanned the darkness, eyes wide, straining against the G-force. "Where are you? Come on, you bastard, where are you?" He smelled it before he saw it, the sharp, electric tang of ozone mixed with the exhaust fumes of the engines running rich. Then, a shadow detached itself from the night. It wasn't below them, it was high, at 4 o'clock. A twin-engine shape, shark-like and fast. A Junkers Ju-88. "Fighter, starboard quarter, high!" Alkemade screamed, his thumb finding the firing button. The night fighter didn't wait. The nose of the Ju-88 lit up. It wasn't the steady yellow strobing of machine guns. It was the slow, rhythmic thump-thump-thump of 20mm cannons. Alkemade squeezed the trigger. The 4 Brownings roared, shaking the entire turret. The vibration traveled up his arms, rattling his skull. He saw his tracers, red streaks of light, reaching out like angry fingers toward the German plane. They were too slow, too light. The German shells arrived an instant later. They didn't ping, they tore. It sounded like a chainsaw hitting a metal pipe, a deafening, ripping screech that drowned out the engines. The Perspex canopy in front of Alkemade's face shattered, showering him with razor-sharp diamonds. A blast of freezing wind, traveling at 200 miles an hour, slammed into his chest, punching the air from his lungs. "I'm hit! I'm hit!" someone screamed over the intercom. The Lancaster lurched violently to the left. Then, the world turned orange. A cannon shell had walked its way down the fuselage and found the fuel tanks in the wing root, just forward of Alkemade's position. The explosion wasn't a noise. It was a pressure wave that popped his ears. A wall of fire, liquid and furious, erupted from the center of the plane. It didn't look like fire on the ground. It was brighter, cleaner, and it moved with the terrifying speed of a wind tunnel. The flames licked backward, wrapping around the fuselage, clawing at the perspex bubble of the rear turret. Alkemade recoiled, shielding his face with his gloved hands. The heat was instantaneous. 1 second, he was freezing in sub-zero temperatures. The next, his eyebrows were singing inside his mask. "Bail out! Bail out! Abandon aircraft!" The pilot's voice was no longer calm. It was a high-pitched command that cut through the static. Alkemade grabbed the turret rotation handle. He had to center the turret. He had to line up the doors with the fuselage to get back inside the plane and grab his chute. He squeezed the lever. Nothing. The hydraulic lines were severed. The fluid was likely spraying into the fire, feeding the beast. The turret was dead metal. He was locked in a 45-degree angle, staring out into the empty sky, while behind him, the only exit was turning into a blast furnace. He slammed his shoulder against the rotation gear, grunting with effort. "Move. Damn you, move!" It budged. An inch. Another inch. The heat was becoming unbearable. The sheepskin of his flying suit was starting to smoke. He could smell the acrid stench of burning wool and the sickeningly sweet odor of melting rubber. His oxygen mask felt like a hot iron pressed against his face. He ripped it off, gasping for air, but inhaled only smoke. He cranked the manual override wheel. His muscles screamed. The veins in his neck bulged. Slowly, agonizingly, the turret groaned back to center. He threw the doors open. He expected to see the interior of the fuselage. He expected to see the dark tunnel leading to the parachute stowage rack. Instead, he opened the door to hell. The fuselage was gone. In its place was a roaring tunnel of fire. The aluminum skin of the aircraft was melting, dripping like wax. And there, hanging on the rack just a few feet away, was his parachute pack. It was engulfed in flames. Alkemade stared at it. The canvas was blackening, curling up like a burning leaf. The silk inside, his only way down, his only hope, was already turning to ash. He reached out a hand, then snatched it back as the heat blistered his glove. The chute was gone. He looked back into the turret. The fire was creeping in now, eating the oxygen, heating the ammunition trays for his machine guns. In seconds, the bullets would start cooking off, exploding in the magazines next to his head. He was trapped in a glass coffin at 18,000 feet, burning alive. He looked at the floor of the turret, 1,000 feet of nothing but darkness below. He looked at the fire. He had a choice. He could stay here and burn. He could feel his skin melt, his eyes boil, and scream until his lungs gave out. Or he could jump. He looked at the altimeter, 18,000 feet. He looked at the fire. It roared at him, hungry and close. Nicholas Alkemade took a breath of smoke-filled air. He didn't feel brave. He didn't feel like a hero. He felt a profound, terrifying clarity. Better to be smashed than fried, he thought. He turned his back to the fire, reached for the turret doors, and swung them open to the night sky. The fire was not a static thing. It was a living, breathing creature, and it was inhaling the fuselage of the Lancaster. Alkemade stood, or rather, crouched, in the doorway of the rear turret, suspended over the abyss. His eyes were fixed on the parachute rack just 3 feet away inside the fuselage. It was tantalizingly close. If this were a training drill, he would reach out, grab the canvas handle, clip the pack to his chest harness, and dive. But the parachute was no longer a parachute. It was a briquette. He watched, mesmerized, as the heavy canvas casing disintegrated. The fire had eaten through the outer layer, exposing the tightly packed silk canopy inside. The silk, delicate and white, didn't burn like wood. It melted. It shriveled into black, sticky ribbons of carbon. The steel clips of the harness, which should have secured his life to his body, were glowing a dull, cherry red in the heart of the inferno. He reached out a hand instinctively. The heat hit him like a physical blow, a hammer of thermal energy that drove him back. The leather of his gauntlet began to smoke instantly. The hair on his exposed wrists crisped and curled. "Jesus," he whispered. The word was swallowed by the roar of the blaze. He retreated into the perspex bubble. The fire followed him. It curled around the edges of the armor plating, sending tendrils of black smoke into his sanctuary. The temperature inside the turret spiked. It wasn't just hot, it was an oven. Alkemade felt the sweat erupt from every pore on his body, only to flash boil against his skin. His flight suit, designed to keep him alive at 40 below, was now a torture device. The electrically heated wires woven into the lining, useless now that the power was cut, felt like hot copper wires pressing against his legs and chest. He clawed at his face. The rubber of his oxygen mask had become soft, tacky slime. It was adhering to his cheeks. He ripped it off, tearing away the top layer of skin with it, and threw it onto the floor. It landed in a puddle of hydraulic fluid that was already bubbling. Think, Nick, think. But there was no thinking. There was only the primal calculus of survival. Option A, the fuselage. To get the parachute, he would have to walk into the fire. He would have to plunge his hands into the flames, grab the burning bundle, and clip it on. Even if he survived the burns, the silk was gone. He would pull the ripcord and release a streamer of ash. He would fall 18,000 feet, attached to a cinder. Option B, the turret. He could stay. He could close the armored doors and wait. But for what? The Lancaster was dying. The main spar was burning through. Any second now, the wing would fold, or the fuel tanks would detonate completely. And even if the plane held together, the fire was coming for him. He looked at the ammunition chutes feeding his 4 Brownings. Thousands of rounds of .303 caliber ammunition. The belts were heating up. The gunpowder inside the brass casings was reaching its flash point. Pop! A single round cooked off in the feed tray. The bullet slammed into the breech block with a metallic clang. Pop! 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 It was starting. In seconds, the ammunition boxes would turn into fragmentation grenades. He would be shredded by his own bullets before the fire even touched him. Alkemade looked down at his boots. The rubber soles were getting soft on the metal grating. He felt a strange, detached calm wash over him. It wasn't bravery. It was the absolute exhaustion of terror. His brain had redlined and simply shut down the emotional centers. He was no longer Sergeant Alkemade, RAF volunteer. He was a biological machine processing data. If I stay, I burn. If I burn, I scream. I don't want to scream. He looked out through the shattered remains of the Perspex canopy. The night air rushed in, carrying the scent of pure, freezing ozone. It was clean. It was cold. It was mercy. He realized then that he wasn't looking for a way to survive. He was looking for a way to die that didn't hurt. The decision was made. It wasn't a choice between life and death. It was a choice between the pyre and the pavement. Better a quick end, he said aloud. The wind snatched the words away. He reached for the rotation lever again, but the turret was dead. He didn't need to rotate it anymore. He was already facing the tail. He unbuckled his lap strap. The heavy canvas belt fell away. He disconnected the intercom cable. The static in his ears died, replaced by the roar of the fire and the wind. He stood up, his head brushing the top of the turret. He turned his back to the fire, facing the open doors that led to the empty night. He grabbed the rim of the turret frame. The metal was freezing cold, a shocking contrast to the furnace behind him. He took a deep breath of the smoky air, filling his lungs one last time. He looked down. There was nothing below him but 3.5 miles of darkness. Somewhere down there was Germany, hard, frozen ground, trees, rock. It will be instant, he told himself, like turning off a light switch. You won't even feel the hit. He thought of his mother. He thought of the girl he'd taken to the cinema in Lincoln last week. He wondered if she'd keep the ticket stub. The heat surged behind him. A tongue of flame licked the back of his neck, searing the skin. Now. Nicholas Alkemade didn't jump. He simply let go. He leaned backward, pushing off with his heels. His body rotated slowly, agonizingly, out of the turret. For a split second he was horizontal, looking back into the burning eyes of S for Sugar. He saw the flames pouring from the wing root. He saw the twisted metal of the fuselage. He saw the hell he was escaping. Then, gravity took him. The slipstream caught him like a giant hand and ripped him away from the aircraft. The roar of the engines faded instantly, replaced by the deafening, tearing scream of the wind. He was falling. The first 3 seconds were violence. There was no sensation of falling, only of being beaten. The slipstream of the Lancaster, churning at 200 miles an hour, grabbed Alkemade and tossed him like a rag doll into a hurricane. He spun wildly, head over heels, twisting, flailing. The centrifugal force hammered the blood into his skull, his vision grayscaled. The horizon was a strobing blur. Darkness, stars. The burning belly of the plane. Darkness, stars. The wind roared with a physical weight. It tore at his flight suit, snapping the heavy canvas against his skin like a whip. It filled his mouth, forcing his cheeks to balloon out, dragging the saliva from his throat and freezing it instantly on his chin. Then, the tumbling stopped. Physics took over. His body, obeying the laws of aerodynamics, found its center of gravity. He leveled out, back to the earth, face to the sky. He reached terminal velocity, 120 miles per hour, 176 feet per second. The acceleration ceased. The gut-wrenching sensation of the drop vanished. To his confused inner ear, he was no longer falling. He was suspended. He was floating in a gale of invisible ice. Above him, S for sugar was receding. It was no longer a machine. It was a dying star, a comet of orange fire streaking away into the upper atmosphere. Then, it shattered. A silent bloom of white light erupted from the fuselage as the main fuel tanks detonated. A fraction of a second later, the sound wave hit him, a dull, percussive thump that he felt in his chest more than he heard. Debris sparkled in the moonlight like glitter. Burning chunks of aluminum rained down around him, passing him in the dark because they were falling slower, or faster, or sideways. He was part of the wreckage now, just another piece of debris returning to the earth. Alkemade watched the plane die, and with it, the fear vanished. It was the strangest sensation of his life. A minute ago, in the turret, his heart had been hammering at 200 beats a minute, pumping pure adrenaline and terror through his veins. Now, silence. Not true silence. The wind was a deafening, constant roar, like a waterfall inside his head. But a silence of the soul. The panic was gone. The struggle was over. There were no more decisions to make, no more levers to pull, no more Germans to shoot. He was dead. The paperwork just hadn't been filed yet. He lay back on the cushion of air, watching the constellations wheel above him. Cassiopeia, Ursa Major. They were bright, hard, and indifferent. It's peaceful, he thought. The thought wasn't abstract. It was a physical loosening of his muscles. His shoulders dropped. His hands, still clad in the charred leather gauntlets, rested on his chest. He became aware of the cold. The fire in the turret had seared his face and wrists, but now the slipstream was applying a brutal anesthetic. The air was minus 20 degrees. It bit through his torn flight suit, freezing the sweat on his back into a sheet of ice. He could feel his skin tightening, the capillaries shutting down, drawing the warmth into his core. He didn't shiver. There wasn't time. He wondered how long he had. 18,000 feet. Say, 90 seconds? He tried to count. 1, 2, 3. Memories didn't flash before his eyes. It wasn't a movie. It was just fragments. The smell of wet wool in the barracks. The taste of bacon grease on toast. The specific, sharp scratch of the needle on a gramophone record before the music starts. He looked down, past his boots. The world below was a featureless black void. No lights. The blackout was total. Somewhere down there were people sleeping in beds, warm under down comforters. Somewhere down there were soldiers smoking cigarettes in slit trenches. He was falling toward them like a stone dropped down a well. 50 seconds. The air pressure began to build. His ears popped, painfully. A sharp stab behind the eyes. The air was getting thicker, richer. He could breathe easier now. The freezing bite of the stratosphere was softening, replaced by the damp chill of the lower atmosphere. He began to tumble again, slowly. A lazy rotation. He saw the ground. It wasn't black anymore. It was textured, shades of dark gray and charcoal. He could distinguish the geometry of fields, the winding ribbon of a river reflecting the starlight, and directly below him, a dark, jagged stain. A forest. The ground rush started. For the first 80 seconds, the earth had looked static. Now it was leaping up to meet him. The trees weren't a stain anymore. They were individual spears, rushing upward at terrifying speed. He felt a surge of biological protest. His body wanted to flail, to swim against the air, to stop the inevitable. But his mind remained in that strange, cold paralysis. This is it, he thought. The big stop. He closed his eyes. He didn't want to see the trees. He wanted the last thing he saw to be the stars. He tensed his muscles, bracing for a collision that should, by all rights, liquidate him. Whoosh! He hit the canopy. It didn't happen all at once. It was a series of violent assaults. Crack! His body slammed into the upper branches of a fir tree. The wood shattered like glass. A branch as thick as a baseball bat struck his thigh, spinning him around. Snap! Crack! Tear! He was a pinball, ricocheting inside a machine made of timber and ice. Branches whipped his face, tearing at his skin. His flight suit snagged, ripped, and snagged again, jerking him violently, slowing him down, breaking his fall in a chaotic, brutal arithmetic of friction and leverage. He was pummeled from all sides. A blow to the ribs that drove the air from his lungs, a smash to the shoulder that numbed his arm. He was falling through layers of green needles and frozen wood, the velocity bleeding away with every bone-jarring impact. Then, silence. Not the roar of the wind, not the crack of wood, a soft, muffled whump. Alkemade's back hit something yielding and deep, the snow. He buried 3 feet into a drift, the powder collapsing around him, packing into his nose, his ears, his mouth. The world went white, then gray, then black. The motion stopped. The wind stopped. The only sound was the settling of snow crystals and the distant, fading whine of a falling plane engine. Nicholas Alkemade lay at the bottom of a hole in the snow, 18,000 feet below where he started. He didn't move. Pain was the first thing to return. It wasn't a sharp pain. It was a dull, throbbing ache that seemed to emanate from the center of the earth. Alkemade opened his eyes. He saw stars. Not the blurred streaks of the fall, but steady, pinpoint diamonds framed by the jagged silhouettes of pine branches. They were still. I am dead, he thought. The thought was calm, rational. This is the afterlife. It's a forest. He lay perfectly still, waiting for an angel, or a demon, or the fade to black. But the cold was persistent. It seeped through the tears in his flight suit, biting into his skin. The dead don't feel cold, do they? He inhaled. Ice crystals hit the back of his throat. The sharp, resinous scent of crushed pine needles filled his nose, a smell so green and alive it made his head spin. He exhaled. A cloud of white vapor rose into the moonlight. I am breathing. The realization hit him with the force of a physical blow. His heart gave a hard, erratic thump against his ribs. He tried to move his right hand. The fingers twitched inside the charred leather gauntlet. He flexed his left foot. The boot scraped against something hard under the snow. Slowly, terrifyingly, Nicholas Alkemade sat up. Snow cascaded off his chest. He was sitting in a crater of his own making, a depression in a deep drift that had compacted under the impact. He looked up. Above him, the forest canopy was shattered. A vertical tunnel had been punched through the thick firs. Broken branches dangled like severed limbs, weeping sap. He could trace his trajectory, a violent path of destruction, where his body had snapped boughs as thick as his arm, slowing him down, tier by tier, until the deep snow caught him like a catcher's mitt. He looked down at his body. He grabbed his legs, patting them frantically. Femur? Whole. Tibia? Whole. Ribs? Sore, but expanding. He touched his face. His skin was raw and blistered from the fire in the turret, sticky with plasma, but the skull beneath was intact. He tried to stand. A sharp, hot needle of pain shot through his right knee. He gasped, collapsing back into the snow. He hissed through his teeth. Twisted, he whispered. His voice was a croak. Just twisted. He started to laugh. It was a wet, jagged sound that bubbled up from his chest. He had fallen 3.5 miles without a parachute. He had hit the ground at terminal velocity, and he had a sprained knee and some burns. It was obscene. It was mathematically impossible. He leaned back against the trunk of the pine tree that had nearly killed him, and then saved him. The adrenaline was draining away, leaving him hollow and shaking. The cold was setting in properly now. His teeth began to chatter, a rhythmic castanet sound he couldn't control. He needed an anchor, something to tell him he was still a man, not a ghost. His hand went to the inner pocket of his battle dress blouse. He felt the metal rectangle of his cigarette case. He pulled it out. It was dented, bent in the middle like a banana, but the latch still worked. He popped it open. The cigarettes were flattened, but one was intact. He maneuvered it to his lips with trembling fingers. It stuck to the dried blood on his lip. He didn't care. He dug for his lighter. It clicked, sparks, but no flame. The fuel had evaporated or frozen. "Come on, you bastard," he muttered. He found a book of sulfur matches in his other pocket. His hands were shaking so violently now that the first 2 matches snapped in his grip. He forced himself to stop, to breathe, strike. A flare of yellow light illuminated the hollow. The smell of sulfur overpowered the pine. He cupped the flame against the wind, shielding it like a holy relic, and touched it to the tobacco. He inhaled deep. The smoke hit his lungs, harsh and gray. The nicotine rushed to his brain, dizzying and beautiful. He held the smoke for a long moment, then let it drift out into the German night. For the first time since the turret, he felt warm. He sat there for 5 minutes, smoking the cigarette down to the filter, flicking the ash into the snow. He listened to the forest, the wind soughing in the high branches, the distant snap of a twig. Then he heard the dogs. It was a low, guttural baying, far off but closing. Alkemade didn't move. He couldn't run. He had nowhere to go. He was deep in enemy territory, a man who had fallen from the sky. He heard voices, German voices, sharp, guttural commands barking through the trees. Hierher, schnell! A beam of light cut through the darkness to his left, then another to his right. The beam swept across the snow, dancing over the tree trunks. The crunch of boots on the frozen crust grew louder, heavy, rhythmic steps. The beam of a flashlight swung wildly, and then hit him square in the face. Alkemade squinted, raising a hand to shield his eyes. "Halt!" a voice screamed. The metallic clack-clack of a bolt-action rifle being cycled echoed in the clearing. "Hände hoch! Hands up!" Alkemade didn't raise his hands immediately. He took one last drag of his cigarette, the ember glowing bright orange in the harsh white spotlight. He exhaled the smoke slowly, looking past the light at the shadow of the man holding the Mauser rifle. He tossed the butt into the snow. It hissed. Slowly, painfully, he raised his hands. A whistle blew, shrill and piercing. 3 figures emerged from the gloom. They wore the long greatcoats of the Volkssturm, the civil defense. But the man leading them, the one with the flashlight and the Luger pistol, wore the gray uniform of the Luftwaffe. The officer approached cautiously, his gun leveled at Alkemade's chest. He looked at the wreckage of the trees above. He looked at the deep crater in the snow. He looked at the burnt, shivering man in the torn RAF flight suit. The officer kicked the snow near Alkemade's boots. He was looking for something. "Where is it?" the officer demanded in clipped English. Alkemade looked up at him, confused. "Where is what?" "The parachute," the officer spat. "Where did you bury the parachute?" Alkemade started to laugh again. He couldn't help it. It was the laughter of the insane. "I didn't use one," Alkemade said. The officer's face twisted in anger. He stepped forward and pressed the cold muzzle of the Luger against Alkemade's forehead. "Do not lie to me, Terrorflieger," the German hissed. "Where is the chute? Spies who hide their equipment are shot on sight." Alkemade looked past the gun barrel, straight into the officer's eyes. "I'm telling you," he whispered, his voice cracking. "I didn't have one." The room smelled of carbolic acid and stale fear. It was a small, windowless box in the basement of the local civilian hospital in Macheda, used by the security forces. The walls were whitewashed concrete, stained yellow by years of nicotine smoke. A single naked bulb hung from the ceiling, buzzing like a trapped insect. Nicholas Alkemade sat on a wooden stool. He was naked except for a rough gray blanket draped over his shoulders. His flight suit, shredded and soaked in blood and pine sap, lay in a pile in the corner like the shed skin of a reptile. A German doctor, an older man with wire-rimmed glasses and a weary expression, was finishing his examination. He prodded the purple bruising on Alkemade's thigh with a cold, metallic instrument. Alkemade flinched. The pain was sharp, immediate, and grounding. The doctor stepped back, peeling off his rubber gloves with a wet snap. He looked at the clipboard in his hand, then at Alkemade, then back at the clipboard. He shook his head. "Es ist unmöglich," the doctor muttered. "It is impossible." He turned to the other man in the room, a Luftwaffe intelligence officer, Hauptmann Captain Müller. Müller was leaning against the heavy iron door, smoking a cigarette held between a thumb and forefinger that were stained yellow. He looked bored, but his eyes were sharp, predatory. "Well?" Müller asked. "Is he fit for interrogation?" "Fit?" The doctor laughed, a dry, humorless sound. "He has second-degree burns on his face and hands, a severe sprain in the right knee, heavy bruising on the torso and back, multiple lacerations from wood splinters." The doctor paused, cleaning his glasses on his white coat. But his spine is intact. His skull is intact. His internal organs appear to be functioning. By all medical logic, this man should be a bag of crushed jelly. Mueller pushed off the wall. He dropped his cigarette to the concrete floor and ground it out with the heel of his polished jackboot. "Thank you, doctor. Leave us." The doctor gathered his instruments, shooting one last look of bewildered awe at Alkemade, and left. The heavy door clanged shut. The lock tumbled with a finality that echoed in the small room. Mueller pulled up a metal chair and sat opposite Alkemade. He was close enough that Alkemade could smell the ersatz coffee on his breath, a bitter, burnt aroma. "So," Mueller said, his English perfect, accented only by a slight hardness on the consonants. "Let us stop playing games. You are Sergeant Nicholas Alkemade. We have your dog tags. We know your bomber was shot down last night." Alkemade nodded slowly. His face felt tight, the burns crusted over with ointment that stung in the dry air. "That's right. And you claim," Mueller continued, opening a silver cigarette case, "that you fell 18,000 feet, without a parachute, and landed in a snowbank." "Yes." Mueller stared at him. The silence stretched, heavy and suffocating. The buzzing of the light bulb seemed to grow louder. "Do you take me for a fool, Sergeant?" Mueller asked softly. "I'm telling you the truth," Alkemade said. His voice was raspy, his throat raw from the smoke inhalation. Mueller slammed his hand on the small wooden table between them. The sound cracked like a pistol shot. "Lies!" Mueller shouted, his composure cracking for a split second. "Physics does not allow this. Gravity does not allow this. We searched the woods where we found you. We searched for hours." He leaned in, his face inches from Alkemade's. "We found no parachute, no harness, no silk." Mueller sat back, regaining his icy calm. He lit another cigarette, blowing the smoke directly into Alkemade's face. "So, here is the reality, Sergeant. You are not a lucky airman. You are a spy, a saboteur." Alkemade's stomach turned over. "I'm RAF. I'm a gunner." "Spies bury their parachutes," Mueller recited, as if reading from a manual. "They bury them to hide their point of entry. You came down. You buried your chute deep in the snow or under a rock, and you waited. You intended to sabotage our rail lines in the Ruhr. You are not a prisoner of war." Mueller leaned forward, his voice dropping to a whisper. "You fall under the Kommando Befehl. Do you know what that is?" Alkemade shook his head. He felt a cold sweat breaking out on his back, unrelated to the temperature of the room. "It is an order from the Führer," Mueller said. "Saboteurs and irregulars are not to be taken prisoner. They are to be handed over to the Gestapo for special treatment. And then they are to be liquidated." Alkemade looked at the white wall. He saw the firing squad. He saw the brick wall, the blindfold, the line of rifles. The irony was suffocating. He had survived the fighter attack. He had survived the fire. He had survived the fall. He had survived the impact. And now he was going to be shot because he had survived. "They are going to kill me because they don't believe in miracles." "I didn't bury anything," Alkemade said. "My chute burned. In the rack." "Prove it," Mueller sneered. "Show me the ashes. Show me the silk." "I can't," Alkemade said. "It's in the plane." "The plane disintegrated," Mueller said dismissively. "Wreckage is scattered over 5 kilometers." Alkemade closed his eyes. He tried to visualize the turret, the fire, the rack. Think, what is left? Silk burns, canvas burns, aluminum melts. He remembered the sound of the clips clicking into the stowage rack. Steel, heavy, British steel. His eyes snapped open. "The harness," Alkemade said. Mueller paused, the cigarette halfway to his mouth. "What?" "The parachute harness," Alkemade said, his voice gaining strength. "It's made of steel clips and heavy webbing, the lift webs, the buckles." He leaned forward, ignoring the pain in his ribs. "If I had used the chute, I would be wearing the harness, or I would have buried it with the silk, but I didn't." Alkemade pointed a shaking finger at the officer. "Go to the crash site, find the tail section, find the rear turret. If I'm telling the truth, the metal clips of my chest pack are still locked into the stowage rack. They'll be fused there by the heat, but they'll be there." Mueller stared at him. He was calculating. He was looking for the lie in Alkemade's eyes, the flicker of deceit. But Alkemade's eyes were flat, hard, and desperate. And if they are not there, Mueller asked. Then take me out into the courtyard and shoot me, Alkemade said. Mueller held his gaze for a long, agonizing minute. The smoke from his cigarette curled up towards the light bulb, a gray snake in the stagnant air. Finally, Mueller stood up. He buttoned his tunic. I will send a salvage team to the crash site at first light, Mueller said. They will sift through the ashes. He walked to the door and knocked twice for the guard. As the heavy bolts were drawn back, Mueller turned one last time to look at the man wrapped in the blanket. Pray that they find your metal clips, Sergeant, Mueller said softly, because I do not like filling out the paperwork for executions. The door slammed shut. Alkemade was alone again. He slumped against the cold concrete wall. He looked at his hands, burned, shaking, alive. He had bet his life on a piece of scrap metal lying in a smoking crater somewhere in Germany. The dawn broke gray and sullen over the German countryside. It was a weeping morning, the mist clinging to the pine trees like dirty cotton. Alkemade sat in the back of a Kubelwagen, a bucket-seat military jeep that offered zero protection from the cold. He was dressed in a borrowed Wehrmacht greatcoat that smelled of mothballs and unwashed wool. His injured leg was stiff, a solid block of pain that throbbed with every pothole the vehicle hit. Beside him sat Hauptmann Mueller. The officer was silent. He held a clipboard on his lap, his leather-gloved finger tapping a rhythmic, nervous cadence against the metal clip. They weren't going to a prison camp. Not yet. They were going to a graveyard. The car slowed. The air changed. The scent of pine and morning dew vanished, replaced by a smell that every soldier knows, the smell of wet ash, burnt rubber, and pulverized stone. It was the scent of violent energy expended all at once. "We are here," Mueller said. They climbed out. The crash site of S for Sugar was a scar on the landscape. The Lancaster had not landed. It had disintegrated. A furrow of churned earth stretched for 200 yards, littered with jagged shards of aluminum that looked like torn paper. The main fuselage was a blackened skeleton, the ribs of the aircraft curving up from the mud like the bones of a prehistoric beast. Alkemade limped forward, leaning on a rough wooden crutch the hospital had given him. He felt a wave of nausea. Somewhere in this blackened mess were Jack, the skipper, the navigator, the wireless op, his friends. "Stay where you are," Mueller commanded. He signaled to a team of 4 Luftwaffe ground crewmen who were waiting by a truck, shovels in hand. "The tail section," Mueller barked. "Find the rear turret mechanism. Look for the ammunition trays and the stowage rack." The soldiers moved in. The sound of shovels hitting metal rang out. Clank, scrape, clank. Alkemade stood shivering in the mist. This was his trial. The jury was a group of enemy soldiers digging through the debris of his life. If they found nothing, he would be against a wall by noon. 10 minutes passed, then 20. "Here! Here!" a soldier shouted. He was standing near a large, twisted hunk of metal that had been thrown clear of the main fire. It was the rear turret ring. Mueller walked over, his boots sinking into the mud. He waved Alkemade forward. "Come," Mueller said. "Let us see your miracle." Alkemade hobbled through the wreckage. He reached the soldier, who was pointing at a mangled aluminum frame. It was the stowage rack. It was bent, twisted by the torque of the breakup, and scorched black by the fire that had raged before the crash. "Clean it," Mueller ordered. The soldier took a wire brush and scraped away the layer of soot and carbon. Alkemade held his breath. His heart hammered against his ribs like a trapped bird. "Please, be there." The soot flaked away, and there, gleaming dull and gray against the blackened aluminum, were 2 steel objects. They were the snap hooks of a standard RAF parachute chest pack. But they weren't loose. They were fused to the rack. The heat of the fire had been so intense that the steel clips had partially melted and welded themselves to the aluminum frame. Loops of carbonized wire, the remains of the parachute cables, were still threaded through them. It was undeniable physical proof. The parachute had not been taken. It had not been buried. It had been locked in this rack, burning, while the man who should have been wearing it fell into the sky. Mueller stared at the metal. He leaned in close, inspecting the weld. He ran his gloved thumb over the rough surface of the fused steel. He stood up slowly. He turned to look at Alkemade. The arrogance was gone from the German's face. The suspicion was gone. In its place was something that looked terrifyingly like fear. It was the look of a man who has just seen a ghost. "The heat required to do this," Mueller whispered, more to himself than to anyone else. "You were in there? With this heat?" "I was." Alkemade said softly. Mueller looked at the sky, then down at the wreckage, then back at Alkemade. He shook his head, a slow, bewildered movement. Then you should be dead, Sergeant. By fire, by flak, or by gravity. You should be dead 3 times over. Mueller snapped his heels together. It wasn't a mockery. It was a reflex of respect. I will sign the report, Mueller said. No firing squad. You are a prisoner of war. Epilogue. The certification. Stalag Luft 3, May 1944. The paper was thin, cheap wartime stock. The ink was fading, but the words were heavy. Alkemade sat on his bunk in the prisoner barracks. The other POWs were playing cards, arguing over cigarettes, pacing the floor. But Alkemade was staring at the piece of paper in his hands. It was a certificate, typed on a German typewriter, signed by the senior British officer and corroborated by the Luftwaffe interrogation records. He ran his finger over the text. It has been investigated and corroborated by the German authorities that Sergeant Nicholas Alkemade, number 1431537, RAF, did descend from 18,000 feet without a parachute and made a safe landing without suffering any major injury, his parachute having been destroyed by fire in the aircraft. A safe landing. He looked down at his knee. It still clicked when he walked. He looked at the scars on his face, pink and shiny where the fire had kissed him. He folded the paper and put it in his breast pocket, next to his heart. They called him a hero. They called him the Indestructible Man. But Alkemade knew the truth. He wasn't a hero. He was just a man who had been given a choice between 2 different ways of dying, and had found the only crack in the universe where life still existed. He lay back on the bunk and closed his eyes. He could still feel it. The wind, the cold, the silence of the stars. He was the man who had fallen to earth, and every day for the rest of his life, he would wonder why the ground had decided to catch him.